Jill Cochran and Derek Hobson are your hosts on Not For Women Only, some of the many people keeping you informed of news, views and events in the region here on TVS.
Good afternoon, and from all of us here at ITN, a very happy new year to you. 1982 has begun, predictably enough, with celebrations that led to injuries in some parts of the country. In London, there were record crowds on the streets, most of them ending up in Trafalgar Square, all so it appeared. Scottish police say it was a fairly busy night, which is not unexpected during Hogmanay. Tim Ewart braved the crowds in central London.
It was a night when central London came to a good-humoured standstill. There was no quick way through, whoever you were. By midnight, more than 100,000 people had converged on Trafalgar Square. The real enthusiasts were there much earlier, some by 6 o'clock, to be sure of getting a good place in the fountains. And luckily for them, it was a mild night. The fountains weren't turned on, but no attempt was made to keep people out of the water. The police, who had several hundred men on standby around the square, contained the crowd, but didn't interfere with the celebrations. Inevitably, there was the odd, ugly moment. But the few arrests that were made were mainly for drunk and disorderly, and there were no serious incidents. The ambulance men, on the other hand, were kept busy. As the night wore on, 100 people needed hospital treatment, and the ambulances made their way through the crowds as best they could. No one was badly hurt. And so to midnight. Big Ben's only a few hundred yards from Trafalgar Square, but the chimes were lost amid the cacophony. The traditionalists sang Auld Lang Syne, others, You'll Never Walk Alone. It just came out as one huge roar.
Now that we are safely launched into the new year, a chance tonight to mull over the old one. ITN's Review of the Year, The Making of 1981, is on our screens at 10:45. There's been further flooding in the West Country, already the worst in living memory. The River Severn rose another foot overnight, and in some places, where it's normally only a couple hundreds of yards across, it's now an expanse of water 2 miles wide. At the town of Upton-on-Severn, hundreds of homes have been flooded, and many families are living upstairs. A few have had to leave their homes altogether. A publican who runs a hotel by the River Severn near Tewkesbury has been marooned for 4 days and can only be reached by telephone. The local water authority says the level of the river should start dropping tonight. The new year has brought fresh faces on television in some parts of the country. It's not that they missed out on the celebrations, but because new franchises came into force at midnight for 3 commercial television stations. One of them, though, has already been hit by industrial trouble. Central Independent Television was due to start broadcasting to the East Midlands from its Nottingham studios, but a pay dispute with electricians has kept that studio closed. 2 other news stations have had a more successful start. TV South, which has taken over from Southern, and Television Southwest, which replaces Westwood, will be going out to nearly 8 million viewers. David Chater's been monitoring their first morning on the air.
3, 1, 0.
TVS will have the richest slice of commercial television revenue in Britain, serving the south and the southeast. It will be covering an area of more than 7,000 square miles extending from Dorset to Essex. Their priority is to woo viewers away from the BBC and win back the estimated 50,000-strong audience, which has turned its aerials to other ITV stations. The mainstay of TVS will be local news and current affairs. Using the latest technology, it will serve the 2 areas of the region with independent coverage of local events.
We don't have...
This morning, they led off with an interview with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Runcie, attacking what he called the inflammatory and exaggerated language of the Reverend Ian Paisley. With viewing figures expected to top 5 million, the company will be making more than 16 hours of its own programmes every week. And in the words of one of its controllers, there'll be laser-beamed, tightly targeted programmes aimed at specific minority audiences.
Into the raids, said this...
Down in the West Country, there was a more rural start for TSW. Serving nearly 2 million people, They'll be putting out 8 hours of local programming each week. And as befits the area, there'll be a strong emphasis on local interests. Fishing and golf will get more airspace, and a documentary series with local settings is to be produced. They'll also be buying in their own feature films rather than taking them from the network, films of proven quality like The China Syndrome. And one idea new to the network, they'll be producing their own 5-minute tea time spot for news and sport on Saturdays. David Chater, News at 1, with the new commercial TV stations.
Some news for travellers in 1982. British Airways will be cutting its tourist fares to Australia by almost half, with return flights starting from £390. But the cheaper fares, which are subject to government approval, are for a limited period only from March 15 to April 30th. The cuts will save up to £385 on a one-month book-ahead Apex ticket and up to £396 on excursion fares which allow passengers to stop off on the way. A 44-year-old mother of two, Mrs. Joyce Smith, will try to win her third marathon race in Japan later this month. Mrs. Smith will be running in the Osaka Women's Marathon on January 24th. Last year and the year before, she won the Tokyo International Women's Marathon, and she holds the 5th fastest time in the world for the race. And now Poland. Pope John Paul told thousands of pilgrims gathered in St. Peter's Square in Rome this morning, "Thank you for your solidarity with solidarity." He said that the word solidarity exemplifies the great strengths of the working people in his home country and their achievements in preserving the dignity of work. In Warsaw, the Polish head of state, Mr. Jablonski, has said in a New Year message that reforms gained over the past 16 months can never be lost, despite the martial law imposed over a fortnight ago. But a clandestine message from a top solidarity leader in Warsaw, Mr. Bujak, who is in hiding, has called on troops and police to listen to their conscience before obeying orders. The military regime lifted the curfew for New Year's, but celebration parties could not be held without a permit. Sports events are to resume from Sunday, and schools will open again on Monday for the first time under martial law. The United States Secretary of State, Mr. Alexander Haig, has said in an interview that President Brezhnev's denial of Soviet involvement in Poland was sheer poppycock, and the likelihood of direct intervention had increased. In Moscow, the Communist Party newspaper Pravda says the U.S. has supported military regimes around the world and wasn't in a position to moralize. In Ghana, the man who has led the latest coup, Flight Lieutenant Jerry Rawlings, has said he's prepared to face a firing squad if he fails to end corruption in the country. It's the young officer's second coup in 3 years and Ghana's fifth since independence from Britain in 1957. Several soldiers are reported to have been killed in the fighting, which launched the coup in Accra yesterday. The deposed president, Mr. Hila Liman, seen here reviewing the army that's now deposed him, is reported to be under house arrest. The new leader has said in a radio broadcast, Mr. Liman will not be harmed. When he was last in power, Flight Lieutenant Rawlings executed former leaders he accused of corruption. At close of play on the first day of the fourth test between India and England at Kolkata, England was struggling at 198 for 5. For the third time running, the England captain Keith Fletcher won the toss and decided to bat on a wicket which looked easy-paced. But in the session before lunch, England lost the wickets of Boycott for 18, Tavare for 7 and Gower for 11. Opener Graham Gooch reached 47 with 5 boundaries before he fell to a splendid slip catch. At tea, England were 124 for 4, and they might have been in even greater trouble but for Ian Botham's enterprising 58. At close, the England captain Keith Fletcher was 46 not out, and the score again, England 198 for 5. And finally, a few other labels for 1982. 1981 was the year of the disabled, and the United Nations has designated 1982 the International Year for mobilizing sanctions against South Africa. And the English Tourist Board is making it Maritime England Year. For the Chinese, it's going to be the Year of the Dog. But that's not until the end of the month, when the Chinese New Year is ushered in with firecrackers, as they say goodbye to the Year of the Cockerel. We say goodbye here now, lunchtime. We're back again at 5:45 to 6. See you then.
Now we have a film about a unique and fascinating experiment. A Dutch zoologist attempts to teach a killer whale to talk, to communicate with man.